Imagine this. You're driving home after a long day of work through the forests of Arizona when a strange light appears between the trees. As your truck gets closer, you realise this isn't another vehicle, and it certainly isn't a campfire. Something is hovering silently above the forest floor. Against the warnings of your friends, you step out of the truck and begin walking towards it. Then a brilliant flash of light strikes you. Everything goes black. When you open your eyes again, you find yourself surrounded by strange lights, unfamiliar technology, and beings that do not appear to be human. Terrified, you try to make sense of where you are, but before you can understand what is happening, everything goes black once more. Then you wake up on the side of a road, miles from where you last were. You assume only a few hours have passed. In reality, 5 days have disappeared from your life. During those 5 days, the police and search teams looked for your body. The friends who watched you approach the unknown object were questioned by the police. Investigators suspected them, and many believed they had murdered you. Yet, despite decades of scrutiny, nobody has ever been able to prove or disprove what happened that night. Nobody has ever been able to explain where you were for those 5 days, and nobody has been able to prove that the 7 men at the center of this story were lying. The story has been so compelling that they even made a movie about it. This is a story of the Travis Walton incident. The workday had finally come to an end. The 7-man logging crew climbed into their truck after another day working at a forest timber contract. As they made their way home through the Arizona wilderness, the sun had already begun to disappear. Everyone was exhausted, and the only thing on their minds was getting home. Then they saw it. At first it was nothing more than a strange light shining through the trees. Nobody thought much of it, but as the truck continued along the road, the light became brighter, larger, and increasingly difficult to explain. They would then describe seeing a large glowing object hovering above and clearing in the forest. It wasn't moving, it wasn't even making a sound, and it appeared to be suspended above the ground. Nobody knew what they were looking at. While the rest of the crew remained inside the truck trying to make sense of what they were seeing, Travis made a decision that would change his life forever. He climbed out of the vehicle and began walking towards the object. The men shouted at him to come back, but Travis kept moving closer. He had almost reached the object when a brilliant beam of light suddenly erupted from it and struck him with tremendous force. The men watched in horror as Travis was thrown backwards. Believing something terrible had just happened, panic immediately took over. The driver hit the accelerator and the truck sped away from the clearing. As the object disappeared behind them, another thought began sinking in. Travis was still back there. Whatever had happened to him, they had just left him behind. The men quickly decided to turn around and return to the clearing. However, when they arrived back at the location only a short time later, the object was gone. Travis was gone, and despite searching the area, calling out his name and desperately looking for any sign of him, there was simply no trace. The minutes passed where there was still no sign of Travis, and the crew realized that this was no longer something they could handle on their own. Mike Rogers, who was the foreman of the logging crew, drove into the nearby town of Heber and reported Travis Walton missing, telling the authorities exactly what the men claimed had happened in the forest. The response was immediate. Police officers arrived at the scene, search teams were organized, tracking dogs were brought in, and helicopters searched the forest from above. The area where Travis had last been seen was combed repeatedly, with investigators expecting that sooner or later they would find an injured man, a body, or at least some sort of physical evidence explaining his disappearance. They found nothing. No blood, no footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle. As the search continued, investigators became increasingly skeptical of the crew's account. The story of a glowing object hovering above the trees sounded crazy, obviously. Detectives began considering a far more normal explanation. What if there had never been an object at all? What if the 6 men sitting in that truck knew exactly what had happened to Travis? The investigation quickly shifted from a missing person case to a potential homicide. and the very men who had reported their friend missing suddenly found themselves under intense suspicion. Each member of the crew was interviewed separately and asked to repeat the events of that night again and again. But despite hours of questioning and being picked apart for every little thing, their story never changed.
And within like 24, 48 hours, there was some question of whether they had murdered you.
Yeah.
And hidden your body in the forest up there.
Yeah, when they went to report it to the authorities, you know, the sheriff and his men could see that these men were still very traumatized, but this story was just, you know, too much to...
Too fantastic.
Yeah, so they, you know, the logical conclusion for them was, aha, they made up this story to cover up for having...
One of the shows that are recently played, they asked, there was some discrepancy about somebody that didn't pass one of the polygraph tests. Is it true that they didn't necessarily pass it, or was it that it became inconclusive?
Alan recently was retested using some of the most sophisticated equipment and passed. Also, Mike Rogers was retested, and I took 2 more tests at that time too.
Meanwhile, the search continued. One day passed, then another, then another. By the 5th day, the authorities still had no body, no evidence, and no explanation of how a healthy young man had seemingly disappeared into thin air. Then, just after midnight on November the 10th, a telephone rang.
Grant! It's me. I'm at the phone booth in Heber. Come and get me, and be quick.
It's Travis Walton. The call wasn't made to the police, and it wasn't even made to the loggers who had watched Travis disappear. Instead, it was made to Grant Neff, Travis Walton's brother-in-law. He was also someone who had spent the previous 5 days fearing the worst. For a moment, there was silence. The missing man everyone believed that could be dead was somehow on the other end of the line. Grant immediately drove to Heber, and when he arrived, he found Travis standing alone beside the phone booth. He looked exhausted, confused, pale, and completely disorientated, as though he had no idea why everyone was looking at him with disbelief. He climbed into the car and began the journey back to his family's home in Snowflake, Arizona, where relatives who had spent nearly a week long looking for him. To his family, Travis appeared exhausted, dehydrated, and hungry. Nevertheless, his return was met with an emotional reunion. But now things get a little more weird. What stood out most was his apparent confusion over the passage of time. While police officers, volunteers, and tracking dogs had spent 5 days searching for him, Travis appeared to believe that he had only been gone for only a matter of hours. Law enforcement officers arrived at his home to confirm that the missing person they had been searching for was truly him. Travis was taken for medical examination, where he was found to be dehydrated and had lost weight. But there were no injuries that could explain where he had been. Let's be honest here. If you were genuinely lost or stranded, walking for days, surely you may have had the odd scratch, bruise, insect bite, something, but absolutely nothing. Only after returning home, reuniting with his family, and finally beginning to recover would Travis finally attempt to describe what had happened during those 5 missing days. The last thing he remembered was the brilliant flash of light striking him in the clearing. When he had opened his eyes again, he was lying on what looked like a table inside a small room, surrounded by a soft light that seemed to come from every direction at once. Standing over him were several small figures with pale skin, oversized heads, and large dark eyes. At first, Travis thought they were doctors trying to help him, but the longer he looked at them, the more he realized that whoever was standing around him was anything but human. Terrified and completely disorientated, he did the only thing he could think of. He fought back.
When I regained consciousness, I was laying on my back. I came to slowly. I was in a lot of pain in my head and chest area. At first I thought I was in a hospital. But when I could finally see, I saw these beings standing over me, and I just became hysterical. I knocked them away from me and jumped off of the table there, and they started to come toward me. I grabbed an object off of the bench there and threatened them. They stopped and turned around and left the room. I was afraid they'd come back, so I left there looking for a way out.
Now alone, he stepped out of the room and found himself standing inside a brightly lit corridor. The walls were smooth and curved, every surface appeared seamless, and there were no visible lights or doors in the way he would have expected. As he moved forward, he encountered another figure, but this time it wasn't one of the small beings. Standing in front of him was a tall man with shoulder-length blonde hair, wearing a blue jumpsuit and what Travis described as a transparent helmet covering his head. Relieved to finally see someone who looked human, Travis immediately began asking questions, but the man never replied. Instead, he calmly guided Travis into another room where 3 more human-looking figures were waiting. One of the figures stepped forward and placed a small mask over his face. Within seconds, he lost consciousness. The next thing he remembered was lying down beneath the night sky on the side of a road near Herbert, Arizona, watching a disc-shaped object silently rise above him before disappearing into the darkness. So, how much of this could be true? Well, Travis came back with a story that 6 other loggers were persistently telling for 5 days, and liars rarely keep to the same detailed story for decades. So, let's take a look at the facts. Let's put the story to one side for a moment and look at what we actually know. We know that 7 loggers drove into the Arizona forest and only 6 returned. We know that literally every person under the sun was looking for Travis Walton for 5 days and failed to find a single trace of him. Seriously, no trace. We know that investigators considered the possibility that the 6 crew members had murdered Travis, and each of them was questioned repeatedly. But the story stayed strong. They underwent polygraph examinations, and the examiner concluded that they were being truthful about witnessing an unidentified object and Travis's disappearance.
After his return, Travis Walton also passed a polygraph test, verifying the truth of his UFO experience. To obtain an expert opinion on what conclusions could be drawn from the polygraph tests in the Travis Walton case, we interviewed Edward Gelb, president of the American Polygraph Association.
The 94% accuracy of the polygraph has been well documented, not only in real-life situations as we've discussed here, but in laboratory and university studies that have been conducted throughout the world. The odds against 6 people successfully deceiving a trained polygraph examiner on a single issue are over 1,000,000 to 1.
We know that Travis Walton reappeared 5 days later after making a telephone call from a payphone in Herbert, and that his return immediately brought the missing person investigation to an end. Remember when he had a medical examination for which they found Travis to be dehydrated and had lost weight? Well, we normally see this when we fast, the act of not eating for days, and for body healing. So if Travis was strapped to a chair for 5 days, completely out cold, and maybe experimented on with no food or water, the dehydration and the weight loss could explain that. Coincidence? Well, I'll let you decide. And finally, there's one detail that I just can't ignore. The beings Travis described are strikingly similar to what many now refer to as the grey alien race, with their small stature, pale skin, oversized heads, and large dark eyes. Similar descriptions have appeared in encounters reported by people from completely different countries and cultures for decades. Even more interesting is that these beings have repeatedly been associated with the Zeta Reticuli star system, located approximately 39 light years away from Earth. In my documentary on Bob Lazar, He also claimed his work at Area 51 identified the spacecraft he worked on originated from Zeta Reticuli, and between Travis Walton and Bob Lazar's experience, they are a decade apart, but still very similar. So, the next time you decide to take a walk, drive into an empty abyss and see something you completely don't understand, think twice about walking towards it.